You can certainly fish soft hackles with your regular trout outfit, no problem at all. But if you become addicted to it and you really want to specialize and thoroughly enjoy soft hackle fishing, then there's a few items of gear I'd recommend you get that will increase that chance of catching a fish and your satisfaction doing so. Generally with soft hackles, you use lighter and less strong tippet materials. You want your leaders and lines to move very seductively in the water. So you tend to use lighter weight, lighter strength materials. And as a result of that, you can break off in a lot of grabs. So a couple of things. One, go to a lighter rod. This is a 4-weight rod. So instead of a 5-weight rod, you can absolutely utilize a 4-weight rod. That lighter weight rod is a little bit more forgiving on those lighter tippet materials. Or you can get a specifically slower action rod like this Trout LL. This is a 5-weight, but it's a much slower action, a little bit more forgiving, and therefore protective of those light leaders and tippet materials that you will be using with your soft hackles. In terms of lines, well, soft hackles are very lightweight. They land gently on the water if you cast them right. So when you find a fly line that's for it, what you want to do is choose a fly line that has long front tapers. This is hands down my favorite soft hackle line for a couple of reasons. It's called a single-handed spay. One reason is that when you turn it around and look at the picture on the back, you'll see it says that the front taper is 18 foot long. What bliss. How softly does that present the leader and the soft hackles on the water? Doesn't scare your fish at all. Second, it's a great line for roll casting, spay casting. And when you get into soft hackles, those are much more effective casts than your overhead cast. But the other reason I like this type of line is because when you do fish soft hackles tend to be unweighted, very lightweight. And when you cast them in the current and they swing around in the current, because they're so light, those flies will skate right up in this top layer, even on the surface of the water. And you'll get a lot more fish getting those soft hackles down. Maybe 8 to 10 inches, maybe 2 to 3 feet. All depends, but you'll get a lot more success fishing soft hackles a little bit deeper. So the other reason I like that single-handed spay line is there is an option of it that has an intermediate sinking front end. This is the same line, but it's a floating line. You can see the peachy color here, but it's what's called an FHI, float, hover, intermediate. So the floating line transitions to a little hover, very slow sinking section to an intermediate sinking section, and those sinking front ends swing that soft hackle at a deadly depth of about 2 foot down, 18 inches to 2 foot. Awesome, awesome soft hackle line. Now, not everybody wants to go and buy a specialty line just to fish soft hackles. And if you're in that crowd, there are still ways to get around it. And those ways are to fish things called versaleaders. And this is a selection of versaleaders here. Versaleaders, let me just show you what versaleaders are. They're 7 foot long and they sink. This one says 4 IPS. This sinks at 4 inches per second. Basically, you add a versaleader to the front of your floating fly line and you turn your floating fly line into a sinking tip. Wonderful for soft hackles. Just get that down a little bit deeper. And when you get into your soft hackles, you want to make sure you have a selection of sink rates for different speeds of pools and different depths. There's a 4 inch per second. There's a 6 inch per second. That's a faster sinking one. Here's a floating version if I do want to skate a fly. And here's my favorite of all, 1.5 inches per second. That's an intermediate. That swings a soft hackle down about 8 inches under the surface film. So if you have your regular floating fly line and you get an intermediate versaleader, that's an excellent, excellent setup. And gradually you'll evolve to get all the sink rates. So all those will help get your soft hackles a little bit deeper. And then on the end of those versaleaders, you attach your regular leaders or your regular tippet material. And when you talk about tippet material and leaders, you can use a fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon's a really good material because it is a little denser than nylon and therefore will sink a little bit deeper. It's also pretty well invisible underwater, so that's pretty good. But fluorocarbons tend to be a little stiffer material. And so my go-to material for soft hackles is a very, very supple one. This is called Supple Flex. It's just super soft. And so my currents wave and waft those flies in the water, whatever microcurrent there is. I get a lot more movement underwater with a very, very supple material. So for me, I love Supple Flex on the end of my versaleaders. and utilize that. And that's your standard outfits. But in addition to that, if you get into soft hackles, probably a couple of other things I'd suggest you get. We'll look at that in the very next chapter. This is a thing called a tippet ring. I'm going to show you rigging in a moment. We'll see what tippet rings are, but if you get a selection of tippet rings, and then perhaps the other good thing to have in your packet is some clips, little fly clips, and I'll show you exactly why in the very next chapter. So your rod, reel, and line, those are basic. Box of soft hackles, fluorocarbon or supplement leader material, and then a couple of accessories like that. And really, you've got everything you need to be a successful soft hackle angler. So now we've talked about the gear, let's take a look at how you rig it and what the best setups are, what the most effective technique and setups that I use when I fish soft hackles. And we'll look at that right now in the very next chapter.